Hey folks, welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. Let's discuss and unpack the astrology of the last 2 weeks, the final stretch of 2020 from the 16th until the 31st of the month. We have some important things to discuss as we try to make sense of what has been a most momentous and interesting year. So we close out the year with the much anticipated Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So Jupiter and Saturn entering Aquarius and forming a conjunction on the winter solstice and beginning a new 20-year cycle. We also have the Cancer full moon ushering us out of the year, and a few other important transits to discuss as we try to wrap our minds around what has been, again, a most interesting year. So what I'm going to do, as usual, is to hop off screen and do this as a screencast so you can follow the chart as I go along. All right, so as we contemplate the final 2 weeks of the year, as we contemplate the end of a year that has been momentous and unprecedented, to use that overused word again, but momentous and unprecedented in so many ways, we see that we are ending the year on an equally momentous note with the ingress of Jupiter and Saturn into Aquarius, forming a conjunction and beginning a new 20-year cycle. So as we look back, we see that 2020 has been essentially sandwiched between a Saturn-Pluto conjunction at the beginning of the year in January, and we have a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius at the end of the year. So the beginning of two major synodic cycles. The Saturn-Pluto cycle being a 30-something year cycle, and Jupiter-Saturn being a 20-year cycle. So we would be quite correct in saying that 2020 marks a major turning point. We don't need the astrology to actually tell us that, but astrologically, we would be quite correct in saying that 2020 marks a major turning point, a major collective gateway, a major watershed period, a major turning point that we're all trying to wrap our minds around. And in many ways, we are unsure of what comes next. But if we are extending this sandwich metaphor a bit, we might say, well, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn in January was one slice of bread. The Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius in December is the other slice of bread, and the Jupiter-Pluto-Saturn triple conjunction or fusion of energies would be the filling that has taken us from one end of the year to the other. So we started the year off with Saturn-Pluto in Capricorn, describing and portending the idea of major structural shifts and a major structural breakdown. With Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, we saw the amplification and intensification of a lot of Capricorn things, the idea of rules and strictures and constraints and control globally, as we've tried to collectively manage and navigate a pandemic. So we've been seeing the blowing up, that's Jupiter, of Capricorn worldwide, with governments and other institutional authorities exercising a whole lot more power and control than we've all been accustomed to. And this would be one layer of the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto energy. Now, within the structural breakdown, within the clear tectonic shift that 2020 has meant for the globe, as we've been saying, one of the other layers of the Jupiter-Saturn-Pluto fusion is this idea of overhaul, transformation, and maturation of our belief systems. Jupiter-Pluto has gone along with many people on the globe, transforming, that's Pluto, their belief system and worldview. One of the layers of Jupiter, a planet that, along with its home sign, Sagittarius, has to do with how we interpret the world and the meanings we assign to things, our interpretive framework, our beliefs, and our worldview. So here we are then, in December of 2020, Saturn now leaves Capricorn and re-enters Aquarius and finally settles down in the sign. That happens on the 17th. Then Jupiter follows suit, leaving Capricorn and entering Aquarius on December 19. And then as we can see on the chart here, we have the great conjunction happening on the winter solstice, December 21, a significant energetic point, the winter solstice. The winter solstice, which marks the sun's entrance into Capricorn. So we see that the sun here is pictured at 0 degrees of the sign of Capricorn. So this marks the time when the sun reaches its furthest point below the equator. It's the shortest day and the longest night, the darkest day of the year, the least amount of light. So the winter solstice, the entrance of the sun into Capricorn, is therefore, folks, an energy of retraction, of going within. And we see this in nature with animals hibernating. The winter solstice marks a time when outer forms wither and we tune more into our interior space, our interior caverns. And that's the sort of spiritual logic of Capricorn, tuning into our inner structures, our inner caverns. And also the spiritual requirement of learning to build our castles on what is within us, on what's real and what's long-lasting. So what's supported here then? Inner reflection, states of introspection and quietude, retraction, contraction, deepening and focusing of energy. So at the winter solstice, the sun symbolically dies and a process of rebirth is initiated. There is surface decay, the trees are bare, there is little sign of life on the surface, yet below the ground there are these powerful renewing forces. So the winter solstice is a death point, but also a point that signals the seeding of something new, the beginning of a point of gestation. Germination. So what we have here is Jupiter and Saturn joining up at 0 degrees of Aquarius, the very first degree of the sign, and this taking place at an important energetic point which signals the death of the old and the initiation of something new. So the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is a seeding point, as conjunctions are, simultaneously representing where an old order is coming to an end and where something new is being reborn. So we could say that Jupiter-Saturn in Aquarius represents the new order socially that is being birthed out of the breakdown of the old. Saturn-Pluto in Capricorn. Now, in broad terms, Aquarius has to do with the thought, the concepts that go into how human societies and collectives are constructed. It's an air sign, so it has to do with the realm of concepts and ideas, the concepts that underpin how we structure our collective existence. So Aquarius asks us to think about the concepts on which we structure society in order to preserve personal freedom and autonomy of all individuals within society. So on one level, Aquarius is deeply concerned with the question of personal freedom. So personal freedom in a broader collective context. Aquarius cares about structuring society in a way where individuals have the right in equal measure to be what they are. So Aquarius says we must structure society in a way where individuals preserve their personal autonomy and freedom. So all individuals in a collective have the right to autonomy and freedom. On other levels, Aquarius would symbolically describe the human who advances the group and moves it forward. So Aquarius is what? Progressive and futuristic. Aquarius would march into a futuristic vision that is radically different from the present status quo. And you can think about this in relation to the people you know who may have a strong Aquarian signature. They're often ahead of the curve on the leading edge. But because Aquarius is ahead of the curve, because they are marching toward a version of reality that is different from the present status quo, Aquarius is the quintessential fringe dweller, the outsider, the one willing to think and to do things outside the bounds of collective thinking. So there's something about Aquarius that is always pushing beyond the boundary, and it would need an attitude of independence of mind to break out of the status quo that is represented by the previous sign, Capricorn. So Aquarius fundamentally describes then the independence of mind required to introduce new consciousness into the collective. It would rely on daring to think differently in order to introduce things into the collective awareness that are beyond the bounds of current paradigms or structures, the current way that things are done. So Aquarius isn't trying to follow what's been established. The Aquarian path is the path that hasn't really been trod. So it's the rule breaker, the fringe dweller, Aquarius, the one who defends the principles of personal autonomy and freedom. Personal autonomy and freedom are indispensable to going beyond the bounds. Think about it. So Aquarius defends these qualities, independence and autonomy of thought, because it understands that they are indispensable qualities that support and allow for movement into new paradigms. In other words, if people don't have the freedom to think on their own terms, then we can't move society forward, because those who advance the collective thought, they have to be able to think outside its parameters, outside the parameters of current thought, current collective mass thought. So, Jupiter in Aquarius, amplifying Jupiter Aquarian things, amplifying a rebellious attitude, a need for freedom from constraints. Jupiter in Aquarius would speak to the opportunities that come from embracing an Aquarian attitude, thinking for yourself, especially at a time when it appears that many experts and institutional authorities appear to want to do our thinking for us. We need experts, but experts are never meant to completely eclipse our own ability to think for ourselves. So Jupiter in Aquarius, the opportunities that come from going beyond the bounds. So Jupiter-Saturn, the rollout of a new collective order. Aquarius has to do with the collective at large and the things that affect the collective as a whole. Saturn in Aquarius, learning lessons, facing lessons and concrete realities in Aquarius domains, one of which is our collective relationship with technology and that most Aquarian thing that we're on right now, the internet. But what we've done, folks, is to dedicate a separate video or podcast to discussing and really unpacking the many, many nuances and themes of Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius, their conjunction, the new 20-year cycle, and important aspects. So this is an hour-long, 1 hour and 5 minutes or so extended seminar in which we really take a look at the layers of meaning, the collective themes and lessons, and then we take a tour of Jupiter, Saturn in Aquarius through the houses of the chart. So what I'll do is to link to that extended seminar on screen, and I'll also put the link in a pinned comment below the video. So there's no way that we could ever hope to cover Jupiter, Saturn in Aquarius in our usual monthly videos with the depth and comprehensiveness that it deserves. So we had to isolate it and give it its own discussion so we can really understand what we're dealing with, especially in 2021, when we enter the year with a Jupiter-Uranus square, and when we have the ongoing square between Saturn in Aquarius and Uranus in Taurus. So for all things Jupiter-Saturn, if you'd like to hear me discuss that in depth, you can take a look at that video/podcast. But for now, we're going to just take a look at the final weeks of the year of 2020 and see if the astrology can give us some useful guidelines for our headspace in terms of closing out the year. So from December 15 to 20, we have the Sun and Mercury joining up in a conjunction in Sagittarius. In fact, let's just go back and bring this up so you can see it for yourself. So we see here that on December 19, we have the Sun and Mercury joining up at the late degrees of Sagittarius. And now let's bring the chart forward again to where we were on the solstice on December 21. Then on the solstice, we see that we have the Sun and Mercury joining up at 0 degrees Capricorn. So lots of zeros as we look at the chart for the solstice. The Sun at 0 degrees Capricorn, Mercury at 0 degrees Capricorn, and of course, as we mentioned just now, Jupiter and Saturn at 0 degrees of Aquarius. So in the astrology of December part 1, we were charting the course of Mercury, talking about its shift from Scorpio into Sagittarius. So Mercury would have been, as we will recall, it would have been retrograde in Scorpio, which would have really supported thinking and reflecting deeply, asking deeper questions, taking a more penetrating look at reality, something which the events of 2020 have certainly prompted for many people across the world. So we said that Mercury in Sagittarius would have supported this idea of coming to conclusions. So having thought deeply, Mercury in Scorpio, having thought deeply about some things, what conclusion am I now coming to? So a Sagittarian activity is coming to overall conclusions and seeing the big picture of things. So we said that the dance of Jupiter-Pluto throughout 2020 in Capricorn represented a mass breakdown of beliefs or worldviews and overhauling Pluto of many people's larger picture of reality, Jupiter. So Jupiter would disposit or preside over any factor in Sagittarius, its home sign. So Mercury in Sagittarius would have led us right back to that Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. So Mercury in Sagittarius would have supported processes of saying, well, now that my beliefs and my picture of reality have had to be overhauled or transformed or restructured in some way, what overall conclusions am I coming to as I approach the end of 2020? What meanings and truths do I now hold about reality, my personal reality, and the collective reality? It's been a wild year, so what are my takeaways? Now, as Mercury moves into Capricorn, supported and energized by the Capricorn Sun, we end the year as usual with a sort of sober assessment of things. And oh boy, has 2020 come with so many things to assess. So Mercury in Capricorn would symbolically support a concrete, practical, sober assessment of things. So looking at the facts of things in concrete terms. So Capricorn would say, well, here's what's going on and here's how I'm going to practically deal with it. In my own life, I am taking a look at the concrete realities of things and how I'm going to practically deal with them. I can't fix every single thing, every single issue in my life right now. I can't fix the world either, but here is how I'm going to practically operate, doing the best I can. So, given how things have shaped up in 2020, what things am I going to put in place to help me practically organize my life? What can I reasonably do going forward? What are the limits in terms of what I can do? How do I reasonably manage my reality while keeping my feet on the ground? That's Capricorn, sober, practical, grounded, reasonable assessment of reality. Now we have an interesting dynamic with Saturn moving into Aquarius, and as we see an Earth trine shaping up between the Capricorn Sun and Mercury and Uranus in Taurus. So as we look to the dispositor or ruler of that Mercury in Capricorn, we find Saturn in Aquarius. So Mercury in Capricorn would have a sort of Aquarian undertone, a subtone or subflavor of Aquarius. The thing with Mercury in Capricorn is that its acute awareness of practical realities can sort of mean that it focuses on a very limited, sometimes even pessimistic picture of reality. So it can tend to focus on limitations and can't see a way out of the bounds or structures of its thinking. So this little Aquarius flavor is a reminder to us as we close out the year and as we enter January to keep our feet on the ground, to be practical, but not to be afraid to consider ideas that are outside the bounds. That's Aquarius. So Aquarius, leading edge thought, progressive, futuristic, not afraid to break into new conceptions of what can be, of what lies beyond the system. So how might you take this into your own life? Where do you need to be aware of practical realities, but still be willing to think a little outside the bounds? And as the Sun and Mercury in Capricorn move into the trine with Uranus in Taurus, this would really underscore this idea. Be aware of practical realities, Sun, Mercury in Capricorn, but don't be afraid to shake things up a little bit, Uranus there in Taurus. Especially where new ideas and new thinking, that's Uranus, where new ideas and new thinking can enhance and really augment your practical life and how you organize it. So Earth trine there involving Uranus. So where Mercury and the Sun in Capricorn can represent where our thinking has become so matter of fact that we can't see anything but the what is, where Mercury and the Sun in Capricorn can convince itself that, oh, well, I'm just being practical, when in truth, it's being fearful and limited in its thinking. Uranus here can encourage us to go beyond the bounds of these limits in such a way that our practical lives can be really enhanced. So things I didn't think of before that can really make a difference to my on-the-ground concrete material reality. Earth trine, Earth signs, Capricorn, Taurus. So perhaps you can think about this, where your fears and limited thinking may need to give way to consideration of some outside the bounds ideas, so that you don't box yourself needlessly into limitation and fear when there are in fact options around you. But these options would have to be revealed by some new sort of awareness. And this is what Mercury, Uranus supports. Being able to perceive, Mercury, some of these outside the bounds ideas. Uranus. Now, in terms of dates, the Sun is dancing in the trine with Uranus from December 22 until the end of the month, and the Sun-Uranus trine would become exact on December 28, and Mercury is dancing in the trine with Uranus from December 23 until the 27th, and the trine becomes exact on the 25th. So we have some overlap there. All right, so let's move on. So throughout December, but coming more into focus in the second half of the month and exact on December 23, is the Mars-Pluto square. So we see on the chart here that by the time it's exact, we have Mars at 23 degrees Aries squaring up with Pluto at 23 degrees Capricorn. So because Mars went retrograde, as we've been pointing out on the channel, it's been spending a rather protracted amount of time in Aries. And so we've had a series of Mars-Pluto square. So Mars perfected its square with Pluto in August, in October, and now it's doing it again in December. And so we've been having this ongoing discussion about Mars-Pluto on collective and personal levels. So Mars-Pluto, on one level of its expression, would describe the release of a lot of unconscious material and negativity being expressed especially through anger, expressed impulsively and from a place of raw instinct. Mars-Pluto, deep anger, ventilating and releasing toxic emotions and energy, especially what is unhealed within the psyche at personal and collective level. So we describe this Mars-Pluto energy as the sort of spewing out of miasma and material from deep inside the collective psyche in ways that can be especially destructive or hateful or even bitter. And we've seen a lot of this kind of thing in heightened ways in the last few months. But on other levels, Mars square Pluto represents an invitation to probe beneath. So Pluto is on one level about these deeper subterranean caverns of the psyche. So Mars-Pluto would support probing into the deeper layers of our psyche to come face to face with what is there at these deeper levels, especially where we're dealing with issues that at their core have to do with how empowered or disempowered we feel. So Pluto has to do with this question of empowerment. So as we navigate toward the end of the year, perhaps this Mars-Pluto square is an invitation for us to reflect on our own personal power, our relationship with it. So personal power, something that this year has definitely brought up for us on many levels. In times of planetary crisis and upheaval, can I still find the power within myself to bring goodness and grace and upliftment and supply into my individual reality? Planetary crisis does not automatically mean a diminishment of your own power. Remember that. In fact, some of you may have found that you dug up on deeper reserves of energy, that this year meant for you a tapping into deeper reserves of energy and power that perhaps you didn't know you had. And you find yourself at the end of 2020 having done a reasonably good job of keeping your reality intact and your mind in good order. So this idea of tapping into deeper reserves of energy and power is very much also a Mars-Pluto thing. I'm drawing on something deeper inside, more horsepower. So yes, many of you quietly have found that throughout the planetary upheaval and political upheaval of 2020, you've managed to efficiently direct the resources of your mind and your action and refine the use of your personal power in extraordinary ways. So you've exercised your personal power to create peace and stability in your immediate personal reality. And for some of you, it's taken a lot out of you to manage the shifting realities that this year has come with. But perhaps as you stand at the end of the year, you realize, well, I did a pretty good job of keeping my life together and in order. So that's something to congratulate yourself for. I've done a pretty good job of managing the kids with school. I've done a pretty good job of providing for myself and my family. And that's an aspect of personal power, creating stability and peace and upliftment in your immediate reality in the midst of a lot of chaos or upheaval. So a few things to consider there. All right, so let's move on to take a look at what Venus is doing, and then we'll take a peek at the upcoming Cancer full moon. So we see that from the 28th until the end of the month and flowing into January, we have Venus in Sagittarius at the South Node squaring up with Neptune in Pisces. So we're looking at this on December 30 when the Venus-Neptune square is exact. So on December 30, we have Venus at 18 degrees Sag squaring up with Neptune at 18 degrees Pisces. So Venus in Sagittarius, it tends to like philosophical harmony, meaning it can use shared opinions and beliefs, Sagittarius, as a basis on which to form connections and relationships, Venus. I'm relating to you because you share the same worldview as me, or shared worldview is the basis for our interaction and connection. Now, from an evolutionary or let's say developmental perspective, we have a specific sort of lens for the South Node and planets at the South Node. So with the South Node and planets there, we are especially alert to where that energy can fall into its shadow. So it comes along with gifts and talents too, no doubt, no question. But From a developmental perspective, we want to be alert to where the South Node and planets there can fall into a sort of shadow expression. And the North Node energy is meant as a sort of balancing and corrective mechanism for the shadow of the South Node. So, as a brief and simple example, South Node in Sag, well, I've become very familiar with a given set of beliefs and paradigms. They've become very entrenched in my thinking. And so instead of cultivating the exploratory, wide-ranging search for wisdom that Sagittarius represents, the South Node can show, well, I've become stuck in certain beliefs. And so Gemini, which asks us to be open to new data, new facts, new thinking, that can help Sagittarius when Sagittarius becomes stuck in its old beliefs and forgets to have an open mind. So Sagittarius would then fall into a certain dogmatism, which Gemini can help to correct. So with Venus at the Sag South Node, squaring up with Neptune, this is an energy that can really bring into sharp focus the shadows of only associating with people who prop up your belief systems. And we have a Neptunian challenge posed to that Venus, which might go something like this. Well, myself and the people I associate with, we are in our own little reality bubble, which prevents us from seeing other people who might not really agree with us or share the exact same views. And so we do something classically Neptunian. We project all sorts of things onto the people who don't share our views about the world. We stop seeing them as human beings and we see them only through what is often the distorted filter of our own beliefs. So Venus-Neptune can alert us to where a cloud forms that prevents us from seeing other people clearly, and we have a very distorted sense of who they are. And so, as we close out the year, this is something that we can witness in heightened ways on both collective and personal levels. So think about it in your personal life, this idea of projection. I make all sorts of projections in my relationships, Venus, because of the beliefs and opinions I hold. Sagittarius, this film of belief and opinion creates distortions, Neptune, in terms of my ability to see the other person clearly, and it prevents true connection and give and take. And this is how the North Node energy, Gemini, can bring a balancing corrective. Gemini can say, hey, well, listen to the other person with an open mind. Bring fresh perception and observation to the person you're engaging with. Don't reduce them to just their beliefs. Don't assume you know everything about them because of a specific belief that they may hold. Listen to them with a fresh, open mind, a fresh perceiving lens. Be curious, Gemini, about listening to people who may not think in exactly the same way you do. You might just learn something. So it's that kind of thing. All right, so let's go on to take a look at that full moon in Cancer. So on December 30, we have a Cancer full moon. So let's describe what we see here. So we have a full moon in watery maternal Cancer in its home sign at 8 degrees of the sign opposite the Capricorn sun at 8 degrees. We have the sun and moon squaring up with Chiron in Aries, pictured here at 5 degrees. So some interesting things to kind of begin to wrap our minds around. We've been discussing Chiron in Aries on the channel throughout the year. Chiron represents the personal and collective pain body. So Chiron in Aries, where anger, Aries, is the result of or is an outpicturing of deeper pain. Chiron in Aries, the pain body would express itself in classically Aries ways through anger and reactive sensitivity. And we've also been discussing some of the pitfalls here where my identity, Aries, is defined primarily in terms of the pain I hold, Chiron. And so We get stuck in repetitive cycles of pain because we define our identity in terms of our wound. Chiron is the wounded healer, which implies quite simply that there are two layers of Chiron. Chiron would symbolically describe or represent the wound, but within the wound, or let's say in a strange way, we can extract from the wound the medicine that we need to heal the very wound itself. So Chiron implies that we're not really to get ourselves stuck in a kind of purgatory of wounds. We're meant to move beyond them in some way or form, the wounded healer. In fact, we've said on the channel here a few times before that we can kind of give Chiron a tagline. Wounds are the keys to higher consciousness. So we're not saying that you can only achieve higher consciousness or higher states of consciousness from wounds. But just like how Chiron resembles a little key, wounds are the keys that can open up the doors to the higher consciousness that comes along with healing. In fact, healing itself would represent that there has in fact been a shift of consciousness relative to a specific issue in your life. That's what healing is, a shift of consciousness. So as Chiron is in a square with both the Capricorn sun and moon, perhaps we have a bit of perspective on how to deal with or address our pain points and our wounds. We need the emotional intelligence of Cancer. We need to be gentle and nurturing with ourselves. We need emotional support from others. But we also need a very Capricornian thing, self-responsibility and accountability. We need to take responsibility for our healing. We need to take empowered responsibility for our own thoughts, behaviors, and attitudes. Because self-responsibility is the hallmark of a truly sovereign consciousness. So I need to take responsibility, but all Capricorn kind of tough love can't do it on its own. We need the gentleness with self. We need love, nurturing, and emotional support from ourselves and others, Cancer's domain. So how do we balance and integrate these approaches? That's the logic of opposing sign pairs. Full moons have a complementary logic that would seek to integrate and harmonize the sign of the sun and the sign of the moon. So too much Cancer, too much emotional support can often enable us in terms of perpetuating our wounds and prevent us from reaching for the responsibility necessary to deal with our issues. Too much Cancer can be, well, I expect everyone to take care of me and to nurse my wounded identity. And that can get in the way of the responsibility needed to take charge of my choices and my life in order to move beyond my issues and pain points. So perhaps as we close out the year, we might think about this dynamic on a collective and personal level. How might balancing a Capricorn approach and a Cancer approach be more productive than being too extreme with either one in terms of how we deal with our wounds? But as usual, we will dedicate, or we will try to in any case, dedicate a separate video to more deeply reflecting on the messages of this full moon. In the meantime, wishing you a peaceful rest of the year and enjoyment of the loved ones around you. Perhaps you may find that within your reality, there is much to be appreciative of. All right, so reminding you as usual too that I'm available for private astrological counseling and teaching consultations, and links to that are in the description box below, where you'll also find links to downloadable teaching content, including my most requested aspects class. All right, so until next time, folks, take care. Talk soon. Bye.